Welcome back. This is Esoteric Wellness. I am Kate,
And I'm Kyle.
and this is our second episode. I'm sure you've all been very impatient for. I tell myself that.
It's officially a thing now. We're committed now.
You've made me commit. So, as we discussed in the end of our last episode, so we'd be reaching in psychedelics today. It's a broad topic.
Yeah, it's as far as I've got this planned out, it's going to be like 3 episodes.
God help me.
We'll definitely get into different aspects of the topic in each episode, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. This is a very extremely interesting topic in a lot of different ways, and I've got a lot I want to cover. So
Before we get into that, how are you this morning?
I'm all right. I'm all right. A little rainy today, but it's a good day to be inside recording. So
I'd be happier napping, but
yeah, I know you're not feeling too great this morning. So
no. Speaking of wellness, Kyle actually has a very uh, interesting way of thinking about your health, and as I said before in the previous episode, I struggle with some autoimmunity and some inflammation and things, and he puts it as it's a bucket. Health is a bucket, and you fill it up. And you can have a little bit here and there, but once that bucket overflows, then that's when you start struggling. Well, I overflowed my bucket yesterday, and it was the damn sour cream that did me in. So we're a bit on the struggle bus this morning, but I have my coffee, and we will do this. It's for the people.
thankfully, it's only audio. No one can see you struggling. So
I am a hot mess this morning. I'm not looking good. Thank God there's no windows in this office because nobody needs to see this.
So yeah, psychedelics. I wanted to start with this because when I tell people what I do, the word psychedelics is in there, and it's always what gets the questions right away. It's a word that brings up a lot of things for most people, and it's just not that well understood, that well known. So I thought, this we'll just start here, because that's where most people want me to start. So, and it's a fascinating topic.
So before you got into what you're doing now, when you would hear the word psychedelics, what would you think?
Me personally?
Yeah.
For me, it was the imagery of, the 60s and 70s hippies and, all that stuff, and, all the psychedelic artwork and music associated with it. And
Which is my favorite kind of
right.
music.
And there's nothing scary about it from my perspective ever, but yeah, a lot of what you've seen in movies and on TV, there was no real understanding of it until I really started digging into this. But yeah, what about you?
I guess my thoughts, like you said, the 60s, the 70s, that revolution, the music especially, like I said, which is my favorite kind of music. I can thank my parents for that. My dad, kind of grew up in that era and love me some Pink Floyd. It's up there. And I guess Timothy Leary is a big one. That's a big one that comes to mind. And I wasn't well versed in what exactly he did. And you had your basic knowledge of what was it, drop in or tune in, drop out, something or another like that. But I think that's what comes to mind is definitely that era and revolution. People becoming free thinkers and all that goes with it. Which, like you said, it wasn't a scary thing. It's definitely intriguing, interesting. And after learning more, and we'll get into that, you learn why that era was like that. So very interesting.
We'll definitely get into that, what was going on at the time, and the repercussions we're still seeing from it. But today I want to start kind of from the beginning. I guess we'll talk about what psychedelics are, where the word comes from, even. We'll get into the science of how they work, because I think that's probably the best place to start. Is what are they? How do they work? We'll get into kind of how they're being used today, how they've been used before, and how I work with them, and we'll get into a little bit of the legal stuff going on around them right now as well. And that's pretty much what I had planned for today. So more of an introduction, get you more of a basic understanding of what they are, how they work, that kind of thing.
Get your feet wet in the world of psychedelics.
Right. And we'll get into some of the more out there, interesting aspects in later episodes. But
I'm excited for that, not gonna lie.
we're going to keep it more on the scientific level today, because I think it's important to start there.
So what's our etymology, the origin of this word?
Well, we'll get into that in a minute. I got to start with my necessary legal disclaimer. I am not a licensed physician nor an expert in psychiatry, neuroscience, or psychedelics. None of the information in the show should be taken as medical advice. Okay. All the information that I do present is derived from scientific studies performed by experts or from clinical experience of licensed physicians. So any information that is my own personal experience or opinion will be stated as such. Today's topic is psychedelics. As I said, the legality of these substances varies from place to place. This show is in no way encouraging anyone to obtain, possess, or consume psychedelics. And it's everyone's own responsibility to know their own local laws regarding these substances and act accordingly. There are risks involved with the use of psychedelics, and we'll talk about a lot of those. Legal risks and beyond that. There's more health-related risks involved. And this is simply a discussion of the topic, the scientific study being done, personal experiences, the risks involved, and considerations to mitigate those risks. In no way are we advocating that anyone pursue the use of psychedelics in any way for any reason. That is a decision that should not be taken lightly and should only be made after doing your own research. And our hope is this can give you a foundation of knowledge and understanding to then go do your own research and make that decision for yourself.
Yeah, what he said. I, however, may not be a doctor, but I play one on TV. So
right. So yeah, your question about the etymology of the word, I think it's quite poetic in a lot of ways. So I like to start there. The origin of the word is from two words in ancient Greek, one being psyche, not at all spelled like you would think, but pronounced psyche. And this is meaning mind or soul. And then from the Greek word delos, this is meaning to manifest or to make visible.
So we're making the mind visible.
Right. And when we get into kind of how these things work, it very much fits. And that term was coined by a gentleman named Humphrey Osmond, who was a British psychiatrist in 1956. And he was good friends and in discussions with the famous author Aldous Huxley, who, some of his works are focused on psychedelics and his experiences with mescaline specifically. The Doors of Perception was a great book. But they coined this term, and they had a saying that went with it. How did it go? To fathom hell, or to soar angelic, just a pinch of psychedelic. And this was at a time when research into this was really taking off. There's a lot of it going on in the 50s. And I forget the word they used before this. It was very long and not so poetic in any
Not so
way.
flourish.
So yeah, that's where the word psychedelic comes from. Um,
Do you think Mr. Huxley was dipping when he was writing Brave New World? That was depressing.
well, interestingly, anyone familiar with that book, the drug that they take in that story to make everyone happy, control everyone, essentially, is called soma, and that's an ancient word from India and Asia that was referring to a psychedelic beverage containing cannabis. So I always forget the name of it, but the mushroom, the red and white mushroom, from Super Mario, essentially.
Starts with an A, I believe.
Um, it was a mixture of those and probably several other things from ancient times, and it was called soma, and that's where he got that term. Anyway, fun fact.
Anita.
There you go.
Thank you, Google.
So when we talk about psychedelics in this discussion, we're going to limit that to what's called the classic psychedelics. And this is including LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, and DMT.
You can't go wrong with the classics.
And we're limiting that discussion to just these because they all work in the same way in the brain. There are other substances out there that are commonly grouped in as psychedelics. Some of these more common ones are like MDMA, cannabis, even to some degree, ketamine. They're all being used in the same way, but they actually work very differently in the brain. So we're going to talk about those differently. We may get into more detail with some of those later on, but for our purposes here today, we're going to be talking about the classic psychedelics specifically. And, all these compounds are found naturally in nature. LSD is, typically when people consume LSD, it's a synthetic version, but it's actually a copy of a compound found in a fungus called ergot, which typically grows on barley. Actually, it was quite an issue back in old days so yes, it has a compound LSD, but it also has a lot of toxins in it. There was a problem called ergotism where, they would use barley. It was infected with this fungus and make bread and stuff out of it, and it would actually kill people.
That's not a good sandwich.
Not at all. No. Psilocybin is found in several species of mushrooms. Mescaline is found in a few different species of cactus. Peyote is probably the most popular one.
Which I believe we were talking about the legality earlier in different places. I know Oregon, I believe, has decriminalized. I'm not sure if they've legalized everything in the state except for peyote, correct? Because of the traditional and
Well, it's actually a close to it, an endangered species now because it grows in such a small, limited area geographically. But there are other more easily obtained cactuses that also contain mescaline.
so leave the peyote alone, kids.
And then we have DMT, which is a compound found in quite a wide variety of plants, actually, in small amounts. And, we might talk about this a little bit, but some of the chemistry involved with extracting DMT from plants is quite interesting. But that's actually a compound found in a lot of plants. Most grasses, for example, have some amount of DMT. It's just not in a form that is accessible.
And DMT is personally my favorite because of how interesting it is, what it does, where it's found. It's one of those ones that once you start digging into it, it's like, huh, well, that's cool.
Yeah, DMT is actually a substance that's created and stored in our own brains.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that that is released in large amounts in your brain when you die. So we'll get into that probably more in the next episode,
That's
but
a whole
very
topic that I
interesting.
can ramble on.
So as I said, there's multiple other substances out there that are even within what's called considered classic psychedelics because they work in the same way. There's close cousins to some of these compounds that are chemically a little bit different, but they work in the same way. But they're not nearly as common, so we won't include those in our discussion. But so let's get into how they work. Um, so these compounds very selectively what's called agonize or activate very specific receptors in the brain.
Agonize?
Yeah, it
That sounds
sounds terrible.
terrible.
It does. It means to just it binds with the receptor and starts a reaction in the brain. And these very specifically bind to the serotonin, what's called the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor. Uh, More shortly, often referred to as the serotonin 2A receptors.
Science, kids. Science.
And this is very interesting in how it works that way because this level of selectivity for a chemical compound is pretty rare. Um, compare this to like an SSRI, which is a drug commonly uh, prescribed for depression, anxiety, that kind of thing.
I know those very well.
Affects the serotonin network as well, but it's not limited to one receptor in that network. It affects the whole network.
Yes, and found out the hard way that you have many serotonin receptors in your stomach. So, unfortunately, sometimes when you start one of these SSRIs, my SSRI of choice was Celexa. Um, I was so ungodly sick for about 2 weeks, and I almost quit taking it because of the way it affected me, and I did not realize that was a thing.
Yeah, the serotonin, I mean, it controls a lot of things in the gut. It controls a lot of things with sexual function. It controls a lot of things with the immune system, I believe. And to this is why there's so much interest in medicine right now in psychedelics because it's such a targeted approach. And you don't get the nasty side effects with some of these other drugs that play around with serotonin. SSRIs, you get, like you said, the nausea. There's a lot of it causes sexual dysfunction.
That seems to be one of the big
That I
complaints
think
whenever I
that's one of
talk
the
to.
most long-term side effects of that. Even after you stop taking that medication, that's a side effect that lingers. Um, so yeah, psychedelics don't have that problem, and that's why it's very interesting. And so when you look at too where these 2A receptors are in the brain, it kind of connects and explains the psychedelic experience. There's a lot of 2A receptors, for example, in the visual center of the brain. That's why, these compounds cause a lot of visual hallucinations.
Get to see those groovy things.
Right. And we'll get into more of the experience aspect in the next episode, but this explains why some of that's going on. And then, when you start to look at what this does in the brain, it's really fascinating. So activation of these 2A receptors causes a phenomenon known as increased global connectivity. So normally our brains are very compartmentalized, very modular, where there's not a lot of communication happening between, say, the vision center and the hearing center. A lot of that communication is limited to within the same module. Yes, there's communication between, but it's very limited. But when they've done brain scans of people during a psychedelic trip, like everything's communicating with everything else.
So you're lighting up like a Christmas tree in there.
Yes. And this explains some of the experience when you have people report like you can see sound and you can
Taste color.
hear colors or taste colors, or there's things are getting mixed up
And the
in your
schnozberries taste
senses.
like schnozberries.
Right. And that explains that, because there's a lot of this communication happening that doesn't normally happen. And they believe that this is actually a source of a lot of the therapeutic value. When you have like mental issues like depression, for example, and you're stuck in a pattern, you're stuck in a cycle as far as the way you think and feel emotionally, right?
Like crap.
Yeah. Basically like crap. So, as we use neural pathways in the brain, the more we use one, the easier it gets to use it, right? These are habits. These are skills we learn. It's like when you first learn to walk, you really got to think about it. How do you move each foot? How do you balance yourself, keep from falling over? But the more you practice it, the easier it gets. And eventually you don't have to think about it. It just comes naturally.
The brain is an instrument.
Right. It's because those neural pathways associated with walking have been strengthened. And it's like psychedelics are, if you think of your brain like an etch-a-sketch, those old toys with the two knobs you turn, and
The young kids have no idea what you're talking about.
it makes a black line on the screen, and the more you travel the same path, the darker it gets. And you think of your brain like that, and psychedelics is like someone comes by and kicks the etch-a-sketch, because to erase everything, you had to shake it. So it doesn't totally erase everything, but it makes it, less strong than it was.
You're talking past childhood traumas with your brothers erasing your etch-a-sketch. Sounds a little personal.
Yeah. You spend hours drawing something and screw it up and have to start all over.
Good job, Ryan.
But this global connectivity really plays a role in something called neuroplasticity. And this is the ability to learn, to reshape our brain, to create new neural pathways and weaken older ones. So when you have something like depression, someone's stuck in this cycle and they take psychedelics, and suddenly they're able to jump out of that pattern they were in. And they're thinking that this has a lot to do with why that is. And this is what they're finding in studies they've done brain scans during and also following experiences. This global connectivity in the brain lingers. It sticks around for some time after that experience. So, we'll get into how I work around this, but following the experience, we call it the integration work. And this is really the work of capitalizing on what you went through. And I think it's more capitalizing on this environment of neuroplasticity that's been created in your brain. And it's like, that's the time window you have to develop new habits, to develop these new neural pathways while it's easy, so that you don't just slide back into your old habits. Because if you don't do the integration work, that's what happens. You might have a period of time where you feel better, but if you don't really make an effort to capitalize on that, your old habits will creep back in. So this, I think, is the source of a lot of the therapeutic value of psychedelics. It's almost like it resets your brain back to baseline in some ways, and just, it creates that environment for change to happen much easier, much faster.
Definitely gives you a new perspective on things too.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think a lot of the therapeutic value also comes from the experience element, what people experience, which we'll get into later on. But in a strictly neuroscientific perspective, this is what's believed to be going on, or what's been proven to be going on so far. There's still a lot we don't understand. This is why we need more research, but this is what has been discovered so far. And there's also evidence that it causes structural changes to the neurons in the brain as well. Um, they've shown that psilocybin in mice, for example, can grow new neurons, which, I know probably you and I growing up remember being told that from the DARE program that drugs will, destroy your brain cells and you'll never be able to grow those back.
This is your brain on drugs. And
Yeah.
then they smash an egg with a frying pan.
And well, these drugs might grow new neurons. So
Joke's on you, egg.
that research is still very preliminary and not well understood yet, but they're showing evidence that there may be structural changes going on in the brain as well.
And speaking of studies and these things that they're doing, I mean, there are some, this isn't like some weirdo in his mom's basement doing studies. These are people like, you have the VA, you do have Johns Hopkins, you have legitimate, reputable folks, I guess, doing these things. It's not just some guy and some of his friends, and the fact I think it speaks highly, that the VA, you got your government based, you've dealt with the VA many a times, that they are taking that and trying to help, these folks who have been through these much more traumatic, I'd say, than your average Joe in their experiences, and using this to try to help says something.
Well, there's so much interest because the results that can be obtained are so far above and beyond any other treatment method. I mean, it's impossible not to be interested in this if you work in these fields, because most of these clinical trials are seeing positive results in the 70 to 80% range. And so 70 to 80% of the people being treated with these get better.
And with results like that and these things, you're probably sitting here going, and why is this stuff illegal?
Yeah.
We ask that all the time.
Meanwhile, most more traditional treatments being used already have success rates of 60% is really good.
Well, and they have success rate. And like I said, I've taken these medications to help with things. But what's the trade-off?
And success rates of a lot of these are actually more like 30 to 40%.
And again, your low success rates we've discussed, the nausea or, sexual dysfunction or, I call it being a happy potato. Like, I feel great because I'm not feeling anything.
And you've got to understand too, what determines a treatment successful in a clinical trial. All that really means is that it slightly outperformed the placebo effect. It slightly outperformed doing nothing.
Good job.
That's all that means. So when, like, say an SSRI is given, people given that do slightly better than people given a placebo that think they're getting something, but they really aren't.
And let's not poo-poo the placebo effect. I mean, there is
no. We'll probably do a whole episode on the placebo effect,
right? And it does. There is some things, and it really is. It is very interesting, and there's proof that some of that works, but
But yeah, the rates of success that we're seeing in these trials with psychedelics is amazing. There's no other way to put it. And you don't need to take these the rest of your life. They're having these rates of success with 1, 2, sometimes 3 treatments.
And as far as treatments, are we going to get into explaining the difference between a micro versus like a heroic dose? Okay.
We'll get into what a therapeutic use of psychedelics look like and what that means versus, say, more recreational use.
The funsies, as I like to call them.
But yeah, what we're seeing is it's impossible to ignore, to put it lightly.
But they are.
Well,
Well,
I don't think they are.
Certain ones are, and those are the ones that, make laws.
I think generally in medicine, there's a lot of excitement around this.
Absolutely. And why wouldn't we even look at it?
And I think we're on the cusp of really seeing this come into more available medicine. MDMA, for example, is almost there. Like they've done all the work. They've done level 3 clinical trials, and we'll talk about what that means. But they're preparing right now to really start providing this outside of a clinical trial setting.
Now, isn't ketamine typically used in a way that kind of stands in for like psilocybin? I know I've seen
Yeah,
things where
ketamine's already legal. It's a commonly used anesthetic, so it has other medical uses that are already been approved for a long time.
and I believe ketamine can also, I think it lowers the blood pressure. So I think that limits who would be able to use something like that as well. So,
Yeah, ketamine has a little more risks involved than these classic psychedelics do, but they are able to see a lot of the same benefits. If you dose it right, you can have a psychedelic-like experience. But I haven't really looked at much of that research on ketamine specifically, so I can't speak to, it. How does it work in the brain? It activates like the glutamate and GABA receptors.
sure.
And yeah, what the hell does that mean? I don't really know, but I know it works very differently. But I do want to mention recreational use. Okay. These substances can be used recreationally, and we're not here to poo-poo that by any means. If that's how you have a good time, by all means, enjoy, because they're safe. They're not dangerous. It's not like shooting up heroin, you know, they're not addictive, and we'll get into some of this, but so I want to take a minute to acknowledge that because it does exist. People are using these drugs recreationally, and if you dose it right with the right set and setting, you can have a good time with it, and that's okay.
Yeah. And like you said, it's safe. And I believe, and I'm not sure if you were planning on throwing this in there, but I'm stealing your thunder. Who was the dude who they were doing a study and he actually used the phrase freakishly safe?
I think that was Matt Johnson. He's one of the lead researchers at Johns Hopkins.
There you go. Johns Hopkins, folks. And when you hear Johns Hopkins, you think, oh, that's highly respected, medical. Freakishly safe.
Yeah, that's how he described it.
Love that phrase.
Because you can literally take hundreds of times the effective dose and be okay. I mean, there's no toxic threshold for these substances.
And then, like today, with the drugs that we have on the streets, and especially from being from, small town Midwest, we see the effects of what other street drugs have done to people. You can take a drug one time, and that may be the only time you do it. And that's, if you're going to have, like I said, the funsies, I mean, that's definitely one to, you know, be that you don't have to be concerned of your life.
Yeah, and let me just address too, they're not addictive. And a lot of people look at these, they're classified as a class 1 controlled substance along with all these addictive drugs, but they're not addictive. I want to make that clear. And you don't have the physical dependence on these as you would with, say your opioids. And that's because you build up a tolerance so quickly to these substances. If I did LSD this morning and I tried it again tomorrow, it just wouldn't work because I had built up a tolerance. So you can't give yourself the immediate reinforcement to trigger that addictive tendency.
So it's not like going back and trying to take your heroin the next,
Right.
your fix.
Now, the experience itself could be addictive. Don't get me wrong. It's something you're going to want more of, probably, maybe, depending on how it went for you. But you can't just repeatedly do that. And also, most addiction is fueled by dopamine. The classic psychedelics do not trigger dopamine. Okay. They're affecting serotonin, which is different. And dopamine is typically where you get your very strong physical addictive.
That's the happy molecule, right, in the
Right,
brain,
right.
dopamine. Yeah.
So it's different things going on in the brain. Therefore, you're not getting into that place of addiction with these substances. And it almost has a way of preventing that. It's like it's got a built-in mechanism say, hey, you need to process the first one you went through before you come back to this for more. And I do want to acknowledge, though, there is a common trend with people when they first get into psychedelics that they have this profound experience. They maybe don't do the integration work and they keep coming back to it looking for the answers they're looking for. And so, I mean, that could be viewed as kind of an addiction, but it's not a physical addiction. It's not a chemical dependency like that. But there is a common trend for people to keep coming back before they really understand the integration aspect. And it's like, I hate to give it an intelligence, but it's almost like it shows you something the first time, and it until you integrate it, it's not going to show you anymore. It'll keep showing you the same
You
thing.
have to do your homework before the next.
Right. So anyway, it's time for our first break. So we'll be back shortly. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Esoteric Wellness Podcast.
Hi.
We are in the midst of our initial discussion on psychedelics. So now I want to get into what is therapeutic use of psychedelics mean? What does that look like? And maybe how is it different from recreational use? So therapeutic use of psychedelics is using these substances as a way to treat or drive improvement in some issue, typically a mental disorder of some kind, or some people use it just to drive self-improvement, self-understanding, that kind of thing, which I would still classify as therapeutic use, maybe not in the medical sense, but it's a lot of the same look and feel, same intentions. But so first, I want to make clear that the psychedelics themselves aren't a cure for anything. They're not fixing something in people. And I think we kind of got into this earlier is, they create an environment for healing to happen. It's not like you take this drug and you're better. Okay. There's work to be done, but I explain it like it's the key to unlock the door to healing for a lot of people. Okay.
It is a tool.
Right. It's a catalyst for change. So we often think of drugs as like the cure for something, take this drug, you'll get better.
Put that Band-Aid on it.
And psychedelics don't work that way. They're not curing anything as far as we understand right now. There may be things happening because of these substances. I don't know. But our scientific understanding today is, these compounds aren't physically doing anything in the body or the brain to fix these issues. But so when we talk about psychedelic therapeutic use or psychedelic assisted therapy, what does that look like? So first, let's talk about dosage. Okay. Oh,
My first thought when you said, "What does that look like?" It was bright colors. Sorry, I'm sitting here giggling to myself.
so as far as dosage, a therapeutic dose of psychedelics is generally going to be much higher than a recreational dose.
Yeah, recreational dose only kind of dips you in. The therapeutic, you're going deep.
Therapeutic dose takes you all the way in, and you're much less in control. So when we talk about a recreational dose, you're taking enough where you're definitely feeling the effects. You're having visual hallucinations, but you're still able in some ways to pull yourself out of it if you need to. And I guess you're still aware and physically present in reality. It may be very distorted and different than normal, but you're still aware of your surroundings in a way.
I can agree with that statement.
Where a therapeutic dose is,
you're not even here.
You fell in the deep end, and you're not going to find your way back out until it's over.
You're at the mercy of
right
the mushroom.
And when we talk about set and setting, it's also quite different much of the time.
And I think that's a big thing that we need to stress is how and who and where you're doing this, because growing up and in high school, people are talking about taking shrooms and this and that, and they're usually at a party, or they're taking acid, dropping acid, whatever, and usually that's not a good safe environment. And that's when you get people talking about bad trips and freaking out and trying to climb the walls or whatever, because you're not respecting yourself enough to put yourself in a safe place to experience that.
Yeah. You said bad trip. Let's just take a minute.
Segue.
Clarify what that means. There's this common misconception that if you have a bad trip on psychedelics, you'll go crazy. You'll lose your mind. You'll never come back.
I was already there.
Some even think you'll just die.
I've even heard the phrase perma trip, where people are like just stuck on that little, crazy, those phrases. And again, that comes.
This is just not true. And on the scientific side, the argument I commonly see is something called serotonin syndrome. And this is a real thing, but there's no recorded cases of it being caused by psychedelics. It's usually caused by other drugs, people combining drugs in ways they shouldn't, that kind of thing. And that is a real disorder where your serotonin network gets completely screwed up and you do kind of go crazy. But psychedelics don't cause that. They've never been recorded to cause that. And it's scare tactics is what it is. But
government would never do that.
What a bad trip really is, it's a scary, it can be a traumatic experience, but it's going to be a trip that's so overtaken by fear, which can happen if you're doing it in the wrong set and setting, things like that. Because when you're tripping, emotions are amplified extraordinarily.
And let's be honest, when you're at that house party, everybody has that one buddy who's a real asshole who's going to mess with you. When you're having an very emotional experience, they're going to screw with you, and it's just going to make that worse.
So if you get into a place of extreme fear, that's going to be a bad trip, but you're not going to go crazy. You come out of it. It'll be over. You may be a little traumatized, but it's not as bad as it's always painted in pop culture. And, a lot of that's remnants of the propaganda that was put out by the Reagan administration and Nixon, and when they were, started this whole war on drugs.
We all know that. I mean, we mentioned DARE earlier. We all know the war on drugs, those buzzwords that, catch your attention and, oh, it's bad.
Yeah, it's remnants of a lot of that misinformation that was put out during that time.
Well, back in the 50s, it was the wacky tobacco. It was how weed is something awful, and now like almost every state but ours has it legalized. So
yeah. So therapeutic use typically looks like, a quiet, calm setting, right? We want to minimize any distractions, any sources of fear or startling or anything like that. basically in every clinical trial done so far, um, eye masks have been worn, music is played, and it's usually more classical instrumental type music that's intended to play on the emotions. It's to bring out emotions.
And we both listened to the Johns Hopkins playlist that they put together, and it does have a variety of music. My favorite's what you'd hear in a Catholic, cathedral music, the choral, the singing, the angelic.
Right.
And then there was some quite a mix of things in there. So it definitely affects.
And a lot of those have been perfected over time to really match the experience. When you first come into a trip, it's a little more playful and you're playing with the senses a little bit. And then, the peak of the trip is more very dark. It's darker, more emotional, that kind of thing. Yeah. But anyway, and this is something I think they need to play around with a little more, because I don't know why they landed on this as the standard, but they should probably do some trials where they're not playing music and see if the results are similar. I know there's some desire to kind of mix that up a little bit in future trials, just to see, what role is the music playing, for example, in this whole process.
Well, that's a huge part of the brain, in my opinion. I mean, I know for me, music is a therapeutic thing for me. Music is a huge part of what I love, and I think it's probably tapping into those different areas of the brain. You're the happy and the emotion, and it does so much in the auditory. I'm sure that helps really facilitate.
And some have made that argument: is it psychedelic therapy or is it music therapy?
Why not both?
So what role that stuff plays in this all, the results, we still don't understand because we haven't done enough research on it. But that's typically what a therapeutic session with psychedelics looks like. And in a clinical trial, there's going to be a physician on site or a nurse or somebody, just in case, that really never happens. But, to meet FDA standards, for example, that's what you got to do.
Safety first, kids.
There's usually some type of psychiatrist, psychologist there as well, in case these experiences have a way of bringing out trauma and things like that. But generally, it's still very safe. People don't have a lot of negative side effects or experiences when it's controlled in this way. And there was an interesting statistic that I don't remember the numbers exactly, so I'm going to make it up here. If I'm wrong, so be it, but you get the idea.
Just send an angry email.
They were asking people to rate that experience, with everything else in their life. And I want to say 7 or 8 out of 10 people rated it in the top 3 most significant experiences of their lives.
I can believe it.
And it's like going to a clinic and getting a treatment that rates that highly in significance.
It's right up there with Disney World.
All of your life experiences. It's like, that's crazy in its own right.
It's like, yeah, the birth of my child was pretty good, but Johns Hopkins, let me tell you.
Right.
They really did it for you.
That's nuts. And typically in these trials, I really, really want to point out that it's not just they're giving people psychedelics and seeing what happens. Okay. They're meeting with mental health professionals before the experience to kind of coach them through it, work on setting intentions, things like this. And they're meeting with these people following as well. They're going through therapy sessions to follow up with these experiences. So again, I want to make very clear, the psychedelics themselves are not curing anything. They're creating the environment for these therapy sessions to really have a huge impact.
Anything. I mean, if you're going to do anything, you can't just expect it to. And I think let's be honest, as Americans, we want that fix. We want that quick fix. We want it now. We want instant gratification. And I'm going to pop this pill to do it. But in reality, when it comes down to anything, when you want to see real changes, real you know, groundbreaking, life changing, whatever, you have to put in the work, you know, regardless. And this is no exception.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Also, I want to point out that as far as the research goes, most of it so far has been focused on sticking to the classic psychedelic psilocybin and a little bit into LSD. And this is for logistical reasons. When you look at the length of trip involved, psilocybin's on average, 4 to 6, maybe 8 hours, depending on dosage. LSD is more on like 8 to 12 hours.
It's a long time, man.
Right. But mescaline is 8 to 15 hours. And DMT, depending on the form, can last even longer. And so just logistically, when you structure a clinical trial, you got to pay people to be there for that length of time. And most of the time after you give somebody a drug, you got to keep them there for a period of time afterward to monitor, make sure there's no reaction, anything like that. So you're talking a whole day plus to pay, a psychiatrist, a nurse, or a physician to be on site. That's expensive. So
I just think it's wild how, and we've discussed this before, how some of these trips can be hours and then other ones, like we said with the DMT in a form, it can literally be a 1 to 5 minute physical outer trip. But in your head, you've been there for, I've heard some people say it felt like weeks or months. Um, like I said, I just really can't wait to get into that one. But how the brain processes these differently and how you metabolize, and it's pretty wild how the body does it.
yeah. And there's one substance outside classic psychedelics. I think it's ibogaine, something like that. It's in that mushroom I can never remember the name of.
The one I just said earlier,
Yeah.
the amib.
You forgot too.
It's the Mario mushroom.
That can last for like a whole 24 hours,
Yeah.
which is crazy. Um, but anyway, yeah, you got a lot of variety in the length of the experience, but the results are very much similar. So a lot of the research has been focused on psilocybin just because it doesn't last as long as some of the others. It's just easier to research in that way. But like I said, they all work the same way in the brain. We know we've done enough research to understand this. So there's no real expectation that some of these other ones are going to act differently, but that is research that should probably be done at some point. And again, as far as setting, it's usually like low light, very comfortable, laying on a couch or a bed with the eye mask on,
Headphones.
headphones, covered in a blanket, all snuggled in.
Get cozy, kids.
Right.
Get cozy, buckle in. It's going to be a good time. Mostly.
Now, what are these things being used to treat? I think, you know, it's a long list, folks, and that's awesome.
It sounds like a snake oil almost. Like when you think about it, like once you read off what it does, like it does this and this and this and eczema and seizures and cancer and this and that and anal seepage and all these different things that it supposedly cures. It just seems
I don't think that was on my list.
no. Figure out something else for that then.
Most commonly, it's been researched and used for things like depression, anxiety,
Amen.
Addiction in the forms of opioid addiction, alcoholism, smoking cessation.
So you're telling me one drug fixes other drugs?
Right.
Yeah, but don't tell people that because it's not like we have an epidemic on our hands.
Exactly. PTSD.
There's your VA.
And end stage cancer. Not to cure the cancer, but to make that process more bearable.
So instead of just doping people up and putting them out on morphine the whole time, they can actually maybe
That's actually some fascinating research. People have been given a diagnosis that they're going to die soon, and there's nothing that can be done about it, are given psychedelics, and suddenly they're accepting of their situation. Like they're okay with that prognosis, right? And to have someone at end of life care who can be given a drug to be like totally cool with what's going on, you know, nothing else does that.
So are they only doing that in trials, or are they doing that in like palliative care or your in your hospice and type situations?
Legally, they're only doing it in trials. There are physicians out there doing it illegally.
Well, you know what? And I'm not, harkening back to our legal disclaimer thing, I'm not saying, but I mean, damn, these people are dying, and they've literally said there is no hope, absolutely no hope. My God, give them.
And we'll jump ahead a little bit into the experience aspect, but it's been compared very closely with the near death experience. The ancient Greeks referred to it as dying before you die. And there's a lot of truth to that. When you go through that experience, you come out feeling like you faced death, and parts of the experience feel like you're literally dying.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into. But I don't know. It makes you look at life and death very differently.
It does. It makes you question a lot of things. It makes you one of those hippie free thinkers. And I have got nothing wrong with that. So
Um, I want to point out some other interesting studies going on right now that really jumped out at me. I looked through the whole list of ongoing studies in psychedelics today, or this was like 2 weeks ago, but still. So right now they're using psychedelics to look into fibromyalgia, which I thought was very interesting.
have to let mom know that one.
This ties in with the chronic pain work I do. Um, and comparing those two aspects of what I do, the process people seem to go through with psychedelics and the process we take people through to cure chronic pain are very, very similar. We're using different ways to do that, but the process, the realizations people have are very similar. So there's a big interest right now in using this for like chronic pain stuff. So I found that very interesting. They're already doing trials on fibromyalgia, for example. Another one is anorexia and other eating disorders.
Really?
Yes. Anorexia, I think, is probably one of the most tragic disorders out there because most people who have it die from it.
And if it's not necessarily the anorexia itself, it's the illness that comes from the malnourishment, or your organ failure is a huge one. That's one of those domino disorders. It's tragic, like you said.
And the results they're seeing from that is very, very promising so far. What else? OCD. Had a lot of success with OCD from psychedelics. This one I thought was really interesting. Lyme disease.
Lyme disease.
Lyme disease.
Like ticks.
So Lyme disease is a fascinating topic in its own right. So they're not using psychedelics to cure. So it's a bacterial infection from ticks typically.
And we know that well, being in a place where the deer probably outnumber the people.
But this infection tends to cause all kinds of chronic problems in people. And they're now understanding that a lot of it's in the brain. You get stuck in this cycle of all these symptoms, much of it pain and things like that. And I don't remember the term, but anyway, the bacterial infection causes all this chronic stuff. And this is what they're targeting with the psychedelics is once the infection's cleared up, how do you address what's left behind? What else? Bipolar disorder. which is interesting because that's typically seen as something more permanent,
Yeah,
not like depression, where it's just, our cycle of thoughts and emotions. Bipolar is often seen as something more like you
it's
have
who you
this,
are.
this is the way it is.
Yeah, depression is like, oh, they're dealing with something. Bipolar, it's like, oh, that's your label and that's who you are.
Right. One you might find interesting is cluster headaches and migraines.
Ooh, speak to me.
There's a lot of those going on right now.
I suffer from ocular migraines. And if you guys don't know what an ocular migraine is, my God, let me tell you, it doesn't necessarily always come with pain. A lot of times it does not. It's not accompanied by pain, but I've experienced everything from vision loss. As a matter of fact, the very first time I had one, didn't know what the hell it was. I thought I was having a stroke. Like legit went to the hospital, thought I was having a stroke because I lost peripheral vision in my right eye. It can cause a kaleidoscope effect. It is very disorienting. You don't necessarily know when it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it until it passes. It's that affects a lot of people. Migraines. I mean, it's debilitating. It truly is. And if you've never had just even a classic migraine, people are like, oh, I have a headache, I have a migraine. No, man, this is like I need to be in the dark. I'm vomiting. Don't talk to me. It puts you out.
Yeah. And this one kind of makes sense to me in some ways because a migraine is something electrically going wrong in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't fully understand that, but
Neither did my neurologist.
the way,
Huh.
yeah, the way the psychedelics affect is, this global connectivity in the brain, it kind of makes sense that it would affect migraines.
Well, the medication, after trying and failing with, my God, how many different, probably 6 different medications that my neurologist had me try between my doctor and my neurologist, my PC. Um, one of them I had an ungodly reaction to. I literally, it says in my chart now, felt like I was dying. But they eventually put me on a seizure medication. He couldn't tell me exactly why I was having these. He knew it was in the occipital part of the brain and it was some sort of malfunction. And so, here, take a seizure pill to fix this. And the slew of side effects that this could have caused. I mean, he even told me not to get pregnant, for God's sake. Didn't plan on it, but shit happens. And, the fact that taking this can cause my unborn child to have severe defects. What the hell?
Yeah. Another interesting one is medical field burnout.
Hmm.
I think burnout is a problem in a lot of fields, probably most fields.
That's what I was thinking. I've got that too.
And from my own experience with psychedelics, I could definitely see how that would be beneficial. This one's really interesting. Autism spectrum disorder.
Hmm.
So there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence out there of people reporting huge improvements in their autism symptoms after using psychedelics. And it's very interesting to me because our son is on the autism spectrum, and not that I would give him psychedelics at his current age, but it is very curious. I'm excited to see the outcome of that.
That's definitely something I'd want to keep an eye on and see how that progresses.
Yeah. It's, autism is one of those things we don't really understand either.
No. And that's why they have changed it from saying like Asperger's, which that is its own controversial origin of that phrase. Just a quick little, it was a Nazi doctor, and you know where those usually go, but they have labeled it autism spectrum disorder because it truly is. It affects every single person differently, and that's what makes these folks beautiful, and like you said, our son, I got a soft spot there. But, that's cool.
Yeah. And the last one I had was chronic pain in general, which again is very interesting to me. Yeah, so that was everything I could find that's ongoing right now.
Snake oil, I tell you.
So that's quite a mix of conditions, and
Well, and it seems like the majority of them are neurological,
yeah,
obviously. Um, and if you can take so many things, and let's be honest, a lot of those things, people will suffer from multiple things on that list and probably take medication. I mean, I am one of those people who suffer from multiple things on that list. And if instead of taking a pill or two for each of those things, the option to take one thing, maybe only a few times,
right.
why?
It's huge.
Why? Why wouldn't you? Oh, wait, it doesn't make money.
That's part of the resistance, I think, to it right now is it doesn't fit into our current medical system design very well, where you're prescribed a medication and you keep taking that medication much of the time forever.
Healthy people don't make them money. And
How do
that's
you, how does the pharmaceutical industry make money on a drug that you only need to take once or twice?
there's not a cure for cancer.
Anyway, we're going down the rabbit hole of
Oh,
conspiracies now, but
listen, give the people what they want.
it is going to be very interesting to see how this is integrated into medicine. Like I said, MDMA is right on the verge of that happening, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
I think it's so funny that, and I don't know if I had this discussion with you or if it was someone else, but we're trying to make all these advancements and all these new medications and these things and this and that, but we're taking it back to something that is natural and that has been there and has been used for, my God, when was the first recorded? I don't know if you can tell me off the top of your head, uh, use of psychedelics. I mean, this
Medically?
Sure.
I mean, in the modern era?
No, I'm just saying how long psychedelics have been used.
Huh.
And then, today, like I said, we're all these medical
Well,
advances, but we're taking it back to something that is natural. And
psychedelics has been with humans from the beginning.
I mean, yeah, because they're not on plants and, tripping.
And I don't want to get too into this because we had it lined up for the next episode,
Yes.
but in the most ancient sites that archaeology has uncovered and on this planet, there is evidence that psychedelics were being used.
And the fact that we are going back to those like roots, if you will, I feel like our generation is doing that. We're simplifying it. We're taking it back. We're tired of living the way we have been. And, no, we're tired of doing it that way. We're going to go back to what we know is true, what works. And
there's ample evidence that ancient peoples had a much more thorough understanding of these substances than we do today. They were finding remnants of concoctions of multiple plants and chemicals and even animals all being put together in one psychedelic substance, and it's just amazing the level of understanding that's been lost.
Listen, dude, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I understand putting out there the science and the origin and how these things work, but I cannot wait to get into the history and the usage and all that. That's the cool part.
We'll get into that next episode for sure. So with that, we come up to our next break. We'll see you soon.
Bye. And welcome back. We are entering our next segment here. Um, we've been discussing our psychedelics and what they are, where they come from, what they do, what they're not, and anything that they help with. So we're going to touch back on what are therapeutic, what makes them therapeutic.
Yeah, I want to have some more discussion around why are they therapeutic. I know we mentioned some of the reasons earlier, but I want to focus on that for a bit.
All right.
So, as far as what's going on in the brain, we talked about neuroplasticity, this increased global connectivity in the brain, and I think evidence shows that that's a primary aspect of why they're therapeutic. Like I said, this creates an environment where change can happen easier, more quickly, and people dealing with these types of issues, they really need change in the way they process their thoughts, their emotions, their perspectives on their lives, whatever. This creates an environment where that can happen much easier than, say, traditional talk therapy, that kind of thing.
Which, by the way, therapy is amazing. Everybody needs it. Don't care who you are.
Which, those processes, more traditional processes, do the same thing. It's just much more difficult and it takes a lot longer.
So this opens you up and helps facilitate that a little bit better.
Right. And let's just use an example like PTSD. Okay. You've had some traumatic experience in your life that's really left you messed up. And normally we go through trauma, we are able to process it. We're able to relive those memories, process those emotions associated with it, and move on. With PTSD, this trauma was so traumatic that our brain builds walls and barriers around this memory. It lays a minefield out from the walls, and anything that reminds us of this, anything that makes us think about this traumatic memory triggers an extreme level of anxiety, uh, maybe panic attacks, things like this, where this person's now not able to ever process that trauma because they can't get near it.
That's what makes the brain such an amazing, truly amazing thing, is that it is protecting you. Your brain is taking the steps to put that away. I mean, there are people who don't even remember the trauma and, until something triggers it. And then it's like, what the hell was that? But that's it. That's what makes it such an amazing and dangerous thing, because it's hiding that in there and not letting you get at it.
Yeah, I use this explanation a lot with my chronic pain clients. This isn't that your brain's broken. It's doing what it's designed to do. It's protecting you, or at least it thinks it's protecting you. It's almost like that one friend that you have that always has the best of intentions, but they always make the situation worse.
God bless them all, because we all have them.
Right.
And if you don't, maybe it's you. Sorry.
Yeah. So what gets people in these positions is their brain doing what it's designed to do. Anyway, so with PTSD, you have this trauma you can't ever process because you can't get near it without all these alarms going off. And what psychedelics do, they suddenly allow people to get near this trauma without the alarms going off. And they can finally, sometimes for the first time ever, start to process that.
And it's almost like those alarms and those triggers and those things that you're having are almost worse than confronting the trauma itself.
Mm-hmm. So, this same thing can sometimes be accomplished through therapy. It takes a hell of a lot longer, and it may never, ever get there. I think most of the time with like PTSD, especially, it's more about learning how to function with this issue than it is about necessarily totally resolving it.
That's like every other thing. We just take the pill to cover it up and move along. I'm a happy potato. Everything's fine. We don't deal with the things.
No, that leads me to kind of the next aspect that I think is going on. And this is more on the experiential side than the neuroscience. And there's this aspect of a psychedelic experience that's called ego dissolution or ego death. So while much of the brain is lighting up, turning on, there's part of the brain called the default mode network. And this is really what we think is the source of the ego. This, for some reason, turns off, which is weird in its own right. Like, why is everything turning on but this part? Um, so this is where you get a lot of the reports of this feeling of connectedness, of oneness with everything. Because you really do. You lose your sense of self, your sense of individuality, your sense of separation between you and everything else. That kind of fades away.
Kind of sounds like a nirvana, if you will. That.
Oh, we'll get into all
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's a
But
whole different bag of worms.
so you can think of the ego as like the source of this, the way your brain's trying to help you. Your ego is your sense of self-preservation. Um, so when the egos gets shut up, like turned off, all these defense mechanisms that are typically part of the problem in a lot of these issues go away. So you're able to come at your issues now without yourself getting in the way.
We would never get in the way of ourselves, would we?
Never.
Never.
I think we're probably the source of our own problems much of the time.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I know I shouldn't have ate the dairy yesterday, but by God, I did it anyway. And self-sabotage.
Yep. So yeah, I think this is a big aspect of it as well, is just that all your self-built defense mechanisms are gone momentarily.
And when you strip that away, then you're able to really focus on what you've got to do and what it's showing you, what you need to show yourself.
And two, also on the experiential side, just the profoundness of the experience for most people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's like PTSD in the other direction, in the positive direction. You have such a profound experience that there's no way you're ever going to forget it.
No.
It's always at the front of your mind. And like, it's almost like this experience reshapes how you look at life afterward, because it redefines your baseline. And because of this, I think, it's so much at the foundation of everything now that you can't help but to look at your issues differently, to look at everything differently.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it so profound? I think there's a lot of things going on there, but I want to go back to very early on in this episode when the saying that they came up with the word psychedelic is, to fathom hell and soar angelic. There's this really duality between euphoria and misery.
Life is all about balance, is it not?
That is very much present in most of these high dose therapeutic experiences. Let me just say that when you do a high dose of psychedelics, it's not all fun and games.
No.
You're going to have times of intense misery, whether that be mental or even physical. And you're going to have times of intense euphoria where, it's the best you've ever felt. I think there's something to that difference of extremes.
Well, and how can you appreciate those highs, those amazing things that you can experience if you don't have that negative or that it is your yin and your yang. How can you appreciate one without another?
Yeah.
You don't see the degree of it without having that. And like I said, life is all about balance, and I think that goes into everything.
And I think too, when you think throughout your life, like the times that have affected you the most, I think generally they're times that sucked.
Sure.
They're times of misery And for whatever reason, times like that are what stick with you the most, where you change the most. You think of a typical like ayahuasca experience, you spend hours purging everything from your body, and you're laying there in a puddle of your own puke, having the most profound euphoric experience in your head. It's like that difference of extremes to such a degree
Pass.
is so profound for some reason.
Yeah, and ayahuasca does not fall under the classical categories, yes?
Yeah, it does.
It does? Okay. I was sort of thinking it did not.
Ayahuasca is a little more complicated, but the main psychedelic aspect is DMT.
Oh, because ayahuasca is a compound of different things, yes?
But there's a lot of other chemical compounds involved in
Yes.
that to make the DMT so long lived.
Mm-hmm.
Because pure DMT, that trip, depending on how you take it, 1 to 5 minutes.
That's insane.
But a lot of the other chemicals in ayahuasca are there, one, to make the DMT able to bind in your brain, because usually in plants it's already chemically bound with something else, and to prolong the metabolism of DMT. So there's plants that contain MAOIs, which incredibly slow down the rate of metabolism of DMT in the body.
And that is something I want to throw in right now. Ayahuasca experiences. We were discussing earlier how safe psilocybin is. Ayahuasca is its own thing. It is with the MAOI people who are on the inhibitors, MAOI inhibitors, and certain medications. It can have a negative side effect in that, and people have died doing an ayahuasca experience, and that is something that is, yeah, that's something people really need to make sure that is that you need to research. And if you're on certain things, you cannot do that.
But like you said, that's due to the MAOI.
Yeah, that's your other medication.
Plants, not the DMT itself. But yeah, let's just take a minute and talk about the risks.
Sure.
So the psychedelics in their pure forms, like you said earlier, they're freakishly safe.
Yes. Love it.
There's no level at which you're going to overdose. The only real risk is, if climbing a flight of stairs is dangerous for you, you probably don't want to do psychedelics, because it does raise blood pressure a little bit. And that's probably just due to the experience you're having. If you just had an experience like that without the chemical substance, it would probably raise your blood pressure as well. So that's really the only physical risk from the compounds in their pure form. Okay. Now, a lot of these things come, not in a pure form. So LSD is typically pretty pure because it's synthetic anyway in how we use it. Psilocybin, those mushrooms are not toxic, but they can cause a lot of nausea, sometimes vomiting, sometimes diarrhea. And that's not from the psilocybin, that's from the mushroom itself. But again, generally very safe. Mescaline, that cactus can very similarly cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. You're eating something you probably shouldn't be eating.
That's usually how the plant world works. If it's pretty and bright and it's dangerous, it makes you sick to not ingest it. Like, get that shit out of your body.
But again, no real risk of toxicity or anything like that.
You can eat some bad shellfish and have a much, much worse experience.
DMT is the one that it's a little more troublesome because it takes a lot more to extract DMT from its sources. Mm-hmm. You can't just, a lot of it's like tree bark and things like, you can't just start eating tree bark.
I mean, you could, but I wouldn't.
But even if you did, it wouldn't have any effect.
No, because they're bound with.
Because DMT in its pure form, you metabolize it so quickly, it's not slow enough to even have an experience. Mm-hmm. So you're just going to ruin your gut eating tree bark.
Fiber. Mm,
And some of the chemicals typically used in the extraction process are toxic. And it's usually mixed with other plants to, add those MAOIs so you can have an experience with it.
I remember us talking, you know, off mic yesterday on the way to the pet store. We have interesting conversations all the time. And to think back, we said, since man, the beginning of man, there have been evidence of these. But the fact that we think we are so developed today in 2023, the fact that they knew how long ago that you had to take these certain plants, these, 2, 3 different kinds of plants, and then this little additive and that additive to be able to make these things work. I mean, people knew what they were doing. And how do you figure that out in say a jungle with millions, I don't know, that could be a bit much, of different plant species?
Yeah, ayahuasca blows my mind. It's a mixture of 3 plants and from a rainforest, which is probably the most densely packed parts of the world with just a tremendous amount of different species of plants. What's the probability that some idiot at some point in time in the past just randomly picks these 3 plants? And it's quite a complex processing to get it there too. It's not like you just mix them together and eat them. There's a whole lot of processing involved. What's the probability that someone just figured that out?
Somebody did it.
And then you ask the indigenous people where they came up with it, and their story is the plants told them.
Dude.
the plant spirits or whatever explain the process to them.
The only thing my plants say is we're thirsty and we're dying.
Right. So it just makes you wonder, like, how the hell did anyone put that together? Either the plants actually told them, or they had some advanced knowledge of chemistry that was lost and just recently refound.
I mean, look at these ancient civilizations that look what they've accomplished and the things they could build that fell in line with the solstice and all these different things. Why not?
Yeah, that's a discussion for another day.
Um,
I want to spend some time talking about the legal status because it is changing.
Slowly.
Right now in the U.S., and I'm just going to speak to the U.S. because it's all I really have full knowledge of right now. But in the U.S., it's still federally classified as a Class 1 controlled substance, meaning it's very much illegal. Now, what's changing is locally laws are being changed to either fully legalize psychedelic substances, or there's another category called decriminalization. So fully legalized, right now, as far as I know, the state of Oregon started just the beginning of this year, fully legalized pretty much everything.
Again, but except what the peyote, because
right, except peyote, just to protect the plant, basically.
Yeah, and I think what that does for the native community and things like that, that is ceremonial. So right. Stay away.
Yeah, but a business propped up selling peyote cactus, they would quickly disappear from the planet. So, but anyway, yeah, the state of Oregon is fully legalized statewide, and there are a number of cities throughout the U.S. Denver, I think, was the first one.
Ann Arbor.
There's a number in California. The closest to us is Ann Arbor, Michigan. There's several on the East Coast as well.
Someone in Connecticut.
I don't know. There's several on the East Coast now.
Yeah.
Some of these are fully legalized, meaning, well, it's fully legal to use, to sell, to have. Decriminalized is a little bit different. So this basically means it's still not legal, but it's of such a low priority that no one's going to prosecute you for having it, for using it. selling it where it is, where it's still a little bit of a gray area. I mean, you can't run a business around selling this stuff in where it's decriminalized. You still can't do that.
They're just not going to parse your
If you're building a business around it, they might still come after you.
that, yes. But so I just did some looking. Oakland and Santa Cruz in California decriminalized in 2019 and January of 2020. Respectively, DC followed suit in November 2020, Somerville, Massachusetts, Cambridge, and Northampton. It's getting there, but it's only city by city. I mean, how many cities are across the United States? There needs to be bigger. Um, oh, Detroit. Detroit just decriminalized. Oh, maybe that's why we have so many podcast hits up around the Detroit area.
I know the state of Michigan is supposed to be voting on it at some point, unless that's changed since I last looked. But
Yeah, politics, who knows?
yeah, so it's beginning to change. It's following very much in the same footsteps as cannabis did. It starts in pockets here and there and slowly spreads, state by state. But I think, there's going to be a tipping point because psychedelics have so much therapeutic potential than cannabis. Cannabis has its benefits. Don't get me wrong. I'm not poo-pooing cannabis by any means, but I think the sheer therapeutic value of psychedelics is so much greater in what it can treat and how significantly it can treat things that, at some point it's going to catch up to and probably even surpass cannabis.
Well, so far we're at 23 states, along with DC and Guam, have legalized recreational marijuana. And there are a lot of states that only have medicinal or a decriminalization. But we're getting there, and if that can follow as quickly as cannabis has, I mean that's a big, there's promising future. But where we're at, we don't. We just got legalized Sunday sales of alcohol, so
some states are slower than others.
Yeah. Welcome to the Midwest, kids.
Time moves a little slower.
And backwards in some states, might I throw in, as a woman.
So yeah, just know your local laws is really the point. Also know the intricacies of those laws. Know like how much you can have on hand before it becomes a felony versus a misdemeanor, for example.
Well, in some states that where it's legalized, you can only have a cannabis, where you can only have so many plants before it becomes, you're considered a business, I guess, then where you're a grow operation versus, personal use. So,
like here where we are locally, there's an intent to distribute.
Oh yeah,
where it bumps it up to a felony if you have over a certain amount. So these are things you should know if this is something you want to pursue and it's still not legal where you live.
Yeah, definitely protect yourselves. Yeah. I mean, not only with the information, for you physically and emotionally, but legally as well, because,
And, I want almost give a word of caution, with this stuff becoming more legal and in some ways more of a free for all.
Mm-hmm.
I really hope that we don't repeat the past. When this first became big in the 60s and 70s, a lot of why that got shut down is because a lot of people were using them irresponsibly. And it was such a shock to our culture that it scared the shit out of people.
It did.
And people in power were scared by it. They were threatened by it, and they had to shut that down.
Well, and I think also in that era and what was happening, there was a war. There was a huge, Vietnam was a big thing, and people were starting to question things. This does make you look at things differently and outside of yourself on a huge perspective. And they're like, hey, man, we ain't about that. And that was another thing. they're thinking, shut it down.
And I think in some ways we need some of that again today.
God.
But I don't want to see it follow the same path where it just builds out of control in some negative ways and it all gets shut down again.
Be
That's not
responsible.
what we want.
Be respectful.
So yeah, do your research, mitigate the risks that are there. There's not a lot, but there are some.
Freakishly safe.
You be smart with it like anything else. And let's not repeat that because we don't need another Timothy Leary on everyone's TV
Oh God.
screaming about this stuff. I know I would hate to see the work of people like Richard Doblin and people like that who have been working behind the scenes since it got shut down.
Are we going to discuss the history of, say, Timothy Leary in another episode, or is that something we can kind of skirt on real quick?
No, we might get into that next episode.
Okay. And just a little taste of it, I guess, what he was saying as far as, I mean, he was doing the research, but he was doing it so wrong.
So yeah, he was a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And he was using psychedelics in his own research and his own practice. But he got to a point where he so firmly, passionately believed in this stuff that everyone should be doing it, that he was literally just giving it to everyone.
Well, Thanos really believed firmly in his things. For my nerds out there, Thanos really believed in what he was doing too, and he wiped out half the world's population with a little finger snap.
So yeah, he was doing some very unethical practices with it.
Yeah.
And it's things like that we don't want happening.
This is why we can't have nice things.
Right.
All right, what do we
got? So we'll take our next break a couple minutes early, and then we'll come back and we'll get into kind of how I work with psychedelics, what that looks like, and then we'll share some of our personal experiences with psychedelics. So we'll see you soon. Welcome back to the Esoteric Wellness Podcast. Last segment of the episode. And like I said, we're going to get into kind of how I work with psychedelics, what that looks like for clients. And then we'll get into some of our personal experiences with psychedelics. So that'll be interesting. So yeah, I think as I explained in the first episode, I work as a coach and coaching people through preparing for and the integration work following a psychedelic experience. So the typical process is I'll meet with somebody, typically twice or maybe just once, depending on their level of knowledge coming into it. But I'll really go through with you how to best prepare for that experience. How are you going to maximize your chances of having a positive experience versus a negative one? And also, how to, setting expectations is a lot of it. You might have a negative experience. Elements of your experience might be negative, and that's normal. But we'll talk about things like set and setting, how set and setting is super important, right? It's really going to set the tone of your experience in a lot of ways. And we'll talk about safety, dosage. What substance are you going to use? Where are you getting it? It's not something I help you do, but I can help you plan for it. And trip sitters, who's going to be there with you? Someone you can trust. Do they know how to best support somebody having that experience? And these are all very important aspects that maybe not everyone thinks about, everyone knows about until it's too late. If you're having a rough time and you get into a place of intense fear, having someone there to help you through that is super important. Now, if you have a lot of experience with this stuff, I would say it's of less importance because you're just kind of more familiar of how to navigate that. But and then we're going to talk a lot about, what are you wanting out of the experience? Why are you approaching psychedelics at all? What are you wanting out of it? Um, and really building a mindset that's more conducive to maximizing the therapeutic potential. Yes, we want to be clear on what we want, but we also want to have an open mind that it might not give us what we want. You might get something totally unexpected, something totally different, and that's okay.
It shows you what you need.
It has a way of giving you what you need in the moment. And a lot of times people don't know what it is that they need.
Oh, like the Stone said, you can't always get what you want. Pick what you need.
Right. It's very much that way. It's quite interesting. So yeah, the first few sessions we'll talk about all how to prepare for it. And then you would go and have your experience. And then soon after we would meet again. We're going to talk through what you experienced, what it means to you. And this is where the integration work starts. Okay, what did you learn? And inevitably this always leads to some desire to change something about your life, something about yourself. And that's where the real coaching comes in. Coaching is all about facilitation of change. So what are you wanting to change and why? And how are we going to make that happen? And typically I meet with people twice following an experience. The first session is a lot of just replaying what happened, what they experienced, and that's an important part of it. And then the second one, we get a lot more into creating a plan. What are you going to do? And like I said, it's really fascinating to me from my perspective as a coach, because typically when we coach people, it's coaching them through the process of change. But with the psychedelic work, it's like they come back to you after their experience and the change has already happened. And it's more coaching around how to cope with all the change that has occurred. So it's quite different from my perspective and how it works, and it's always fascinated me. But because you come out of it a changed person in a lot of ways. I mean, if you don't do the integration work, you'll slowly revert back to what you were before, but you come out pretty changed. And when in a matter of hours, how you look at yourself, how you look at the world is drastically different. And you're kind of sitting there wondering what the hell do I do now?
That was a lot of information.
Right. And you have to somehow go back to your everyday life, this totally different person. And that can be extremely challenging.
It's like you're awake now. Your eyes are open and you're looking around going, what the fuck? Like, there's just it can be a lot to take on and not know what to do with it. It's like getting all this information all of a sudden and seeing everything different and not knowing how to walk in the world now.
Right. It, a lot of people feel lost. It is a big part of it. And there's also oftentimes almost like a grieving process
Yeah.
of, you've left your former self behind in such a big way. There's a grieving process involved.
There may be tears.
A lot of times, yeah. um, so yeah, that's kind of what that process with me would look like. Again, the success of these clinical trials is all dependent on the support before and after, and that's what I seek to provide, outside of the clinical setting, for people who see all these amazing results and they're like, well, I have that, I have this. It's helping those people. Why can't I help myself? So anyone who's made that decision but still wants to do it the right way with the extra support, that's, again, so very, very critical to success. Um, that's who I seek to help out. Hopefully the day comes where you can go to the neighborhood clinic in town and go, have a psychedelic experience in that setting. That I hope that day comes, but until it does, I seek to help people get around that, to help themselves in a lot of ways. Anything you want to add to that?
The change is slow, and like we said, we're seeing it. Um, but I think it's going to be people speaking up and pushing what we have seen, and the trials and the things like that, and education is huge, um, and help pushing this along. So, we're getting there. It can be really frustrating knowing what we know and seeing all this and relaying it to people, and you're going, why the hell is this not? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It especially shortly following, your first experience with psychedelics, you're like, everyone needs to do this. Because it is just that profound and that life changing. And it's like you have this initial reaction to want to shove it down everyone's throat. And like I said earlier, that's
Timothy Leary.
not what we want to do. But it is hard not to feel that way.
And you can't make someone change and want to do these things. This is just it's like overcoming an addiction. The person's gonna have to want to come to do this themselves, because it can be so profound. Like you said, it can be terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to want to make those changes and be willing to go through that process to do it. And you can't force someone to do that. You have to be mentally and emotionally ready, more so than I think physically at all.
Well, I think to that point, I think that's part of the power of psychedelics is, to get through a lot of these issues on your own in more traditional ways takes a lot of extreme amount of willpower. But psychedelics have a way of kind of kicking you down that path, forcing you down that path a little bit. I mean, you still have to ultimately do the integration work and choose to do it. But it's a big kick in the ass in that direction. It kind of brings your issues to the surface and rubs your nose in it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of the power. It gives people that initial motivation, that initial kick in the ass to work on this stuff.
And it's like showing what you know in there. Like, all this shit deep down, let's be honest. Yeah. But it's pulling it out and being like, all right, we're not ignoring this now. It's like your brain being like, all right, here it is. Do it.
It's funny. I had this conversation. It's like psychedelics coach you in the way I wish I could coach people. Sometimes you just want to grab them by the arm and say, okay, here, look at what you're doing to yourself. Knock it off.
I think that might be frowned upon and you might lose some clients.
Yeah, that obviously doesn't work. But psychedelics do that in a way. It's like it shows you your shit and it makes it impossible to avoid. And it's not a gentle process.
No.
Let me make that clear. It's not going to like slowly lead you along and make you feel good the whole time.
No, it's like nice at the beginning and then it's like, what the hell is happening?
Yeah, it's not nice all the time.
And that's the thing. That's the world. And when you are trying to work on things, it's not nice. You have to peel back the soft, pretty, cushy, sugar coated shit and see the ugly underneath and really see it for what it is to work on that.
Yeah.
You know, you got to pull off the band aid to see the wound to fix it, not just keep putting more band aids on it because then it's going to get gross under there.
Right.
And it does for a lot of us.
So with that, I want to get into kind of our personal experiences with it. I guess I'll start. So much of my experience with psychedelics, or all of my experience really, is with psilocybin mushrooms. Um, you know, I went into it my first time. I was already changing a lot in my life. I had walked away from my past career. I was really just beginning this journey into coaching. And my intention going into it, it's something that it had always really interested me. It was always on my bucket list. And it's like, well, now I had a lot more time to pursue things. And it's like, oh, well, let's do this. And
Imagine my surprise.
all these changes I was making, there was a lot of doubt still in my mind. Am I doing the right thing? Am I going to be good at this? And I was looking towards it for clarification on a lot of that stuff. Um, I guess verification that I was doing the right thing was mostly what I was looking for. And my first experience with mushrooms was holy shit.
You didn't talk about it right away afterward, and you were.
I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't find words to describe it. It's still hard to describe in a lot of ways.
Me, on the other hand, I didn't shut the fuck up. So,
And that's probably just a difference in how we process experiences. But
well, we are very different.
right. So I had this intense feeling of just this need to let go. Okay. And this is a common element in psychedelic experiences. This is part of that ego dissolution we talked about. And I remember, like, I'm having so during this experience, you never lose like your conscious mind.
Mm-mm.
It's far different from other drugs like alcohol, for example, where you just don't remember anything. You're fully there the whole time. Reality is slipping away around you, but your logic mind, your conscious mind, is always still there and still working as it normally does. So you're analyzing this whole situation the whole time, like, holy crap. But I had this intense, overwhelming feeling that I was dying. And, I remember I was focusing on my heartbeat, and the time between each heartbeat kept getting longer and longer and longer. And it felt like an eternity in between heartbeats. And eventually it just gets to the point where I had this overwhelming urge or realization. I just need to let go. It's okay if I don't come back. And you have this thought that if I let go, I will die. I will die. I won't come back. And it just builds and builds and builds. And eventually I was like, all right, fuck it. And let go. And it's like, I didn't feel that next heartbeat for ages. It's so crazy. Time gets weird. But at that very moment where you commit to letting go, it's like the whole experience changes.
Oh, it's so metaphorical in a way. Like, let go.
Right.
Let go of the control and the pain and the anxiety and the literally let it go.
Yeah. And I think this is it's such a huge commonality in the research too, as far as what people experience. But I think this is a big part of the therapeutic aspect is you really figure out that ability to just let go. But anyway, once that happened, that's when shit got crazy. I was zipping through the galaxy, and it was very spacey for me for some reason. I don't know. But as soon as you let go, you get this overwhelming sense of you really lose your sense of self. This is where that connectedness comes in, that you really feel at one with the universe. It's it's so hard to describe to someone who's never experienced it.
It sounds absolutely wild. And I've talked about my experience, with people, and I sound like a goddamn madman talking about it.
Right.
But when I do, and still, like to this day, I want to cry when I'm talking about it
Yeah,
because it
I'm
was,
tearing up a little bit.
I
I
know,
know.
because it's so, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, like for real. Like I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago and I was explaining this to them and what I experienced. And I literally started tearing up because it still was such an amazing experience that you could not have had any other way, in my opinion.
Right.
And it was changing. Like, I mean, I grew a goddamn mountain, dude. Like, I went from this really fun, beautiful, from seeing heaven, literally. I don't know if my brain was putting together what we traditionally think of as heaven. Like, I was nestled in a fucking cloud and saw the lights. And this was the part in the music when I was mentioned earlier, that beautiful choiral, high pitched singing. I mean, I was sobbing.
So, as far as what I gained from it, you know, there's a funny, so you'll hear a lot of people say psychedelics have a sense of humor.
Yeah. I remember
There's
this.
a lot of truth to this.
Yeah.
It will teach you lessons in ways that are just funny after the fact. So, a big lesson out of that experience for me was, before I was very critical of myself, um, things like that. A lot of, I was always worried, am I good at this? Am I doing this right? That kind of thing. A lot of self-criticism. And, it, we were joking before I did it
No.
about
Yeah.
having to go to the bathroom during the trip. And this is probably where that came from. It put the idea in my mind, but it brought me to such a low place of sadness. And while I was in that low spot of this experience, I was thoroughly convinced that I pissed myself.
You came out like, I think I pissed my pants.
I could feel it, I could smell it, everything. Thoroughly convinced. I had pissed all over the floor. I'm laying there in this chair, I can't move for some reason, and I just wet myself. And like such an intense feeling of, I was so upset, so ashamed in that moment. Like I've never felt it to that degree before.
Mm-hmm.
And then it takes a turn, and it's like it's all about this feeling of acceptance that yes, you're laying in a puddle of your own piss, but it's okay. And it was so strange, so strange. But when I came out of it, when I came to, and I'm like, oh God, I gotta clean up this mess now. And I'm like feeling all over, my pants are dry, the blanket's dry. Like, what the fuck? That didn't even happen. It was just crazy. And that's a sense of humor aspect I was talking about. It's like I've never had an experience like that with it since, but that was just crazy. Um, but as far as what I got out of it, that lesson was a big one, but a very unexpected element, and we're going to dive into this a lot in the next episode, is this going into that experience. I was, a pretty convinced atheist, I would say. I didn't think there was meaning to anything. I didn't think there was anything beyond this life. And that experience dramatically changed my views on that. I don't know if I'd call myself religious, but a very strong sense of spirituality now that I'm still in a lot of ways piecing together, but that was an unexpected outcome, I think, that I wasn't looking for. I didn't want, but I seemed to have found through that process. So yeah, if you want to share your experience.
Yeah, I think I can do that. I wrestled with myself a lot and whether I wanted to do this or not. Um, but I decided that if this is something that can help people, then I'll do it. Um, like I kind of got in earlier, I was still on I was weaning off my meds at this point in time. And or was I still fully? I think I was still fully on my meds. So I don't think I got as deep of an experience like pissing my pants. but but um in the beginning, like I said, it was so beautiful. And it took me a while to kind of get into it just because, like I said, I think my brain was fighting me because I was still on my medication.
Yeah, SSRIs can kind of weaken the experience for a
Yeah.
lot of people.
I still had a hell of an experience though. So I get in, and like I said, my brain is showing me like I literally had it what it would be like a death experience. I was laying on the couch, I'm blindfolded, I've got my music going, and I'm curled up in my dog. And that was the wild thing. I could feel her the entire time. I mean, I'm having these wild ass experiences, but she like kept me grounded. Like you're aware that you're here. So I am literally nestling into this cloud. I'm looking up. I'm seeing light. I am seeing figures flying around. It's angelic. I was literally sobbing because this was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'd never felt so safe. And so, like, I never want to leave this place. And if that is what a near death experience is, if that's what people are experiencing, there's no wonder why they're saying, I'm not coming back. Like, it was great. Some of that's my brain taking what we're told, quote unquote, heaven looks like. Or if I was some on weird ass plane, I don't know. But whatever this was, it was amazing. And then it started to turn um and get kind of weird. I got kind of Tron like there for a while. It really was. It was kind of Tronish. And then we went into the oh, so there's a part in the playlist. And by the way, whoever's setting up your playlist, make sure it's not on shuffle, Kyle.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. So the end of the playlist is supposed to be like these beautiful ocean waves. Well, they weren't. It morphed into me being on this outer planet that was desolate and deserted, and the wind was kicking up, and I was by myself. And I never felt so alone in my life and so lost and terrified. And the waves transformed into in the sound in my head. I was caught in this storm, this hurricane, and I was being thrashed around, ripped apart. And I remember coming up for air and ripping this blindfold off, and I was sobbing. I was terrified, and I had to pee real bad. And you were there, and um, basically calmed me down. Realized the music was on shuffle. Good job. Straightened it out.
It all happens for a
I
reason.
didn't. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to lay back down. I didn't want to lay back down. And then I did, and I'm coming over this, and it got real dark. It was really dark, and the music started out very low and kind of intimidating. And then it started to grow, and as it was growing, I had taken a seed and I planted it in this darkness. And then I started to watch the seed grow into grass and then into, the lands. And then as the music reached this pitch, this point, I'm coming out of this sadness, and it was amazing. And I grew a fucking mountain, dude. Like, and to me, what I took out of that was, you feel so alone. I come out, you were there, you helped me. Don't toot your horn on this, okay? And then I realized that I'm capable. I planted this small seed, and I literally grew a fucking mountain. like I am capable of taking this little thing. And I felt so empowered that I'm, not weak and I wasn't alone and I can do these things. And I'm telling you what, dude, that was my big thing for the longest time. I'm kind of about ready to cry. But I kept telling you, like, I can do shit. I grew that. And that was an experience that I will never forget,
Wow.
dude.
But yeah, I just want to highlight, both of our experience. It's not always a fun experience, right?
No, no, I did a lot of sobbing.
Yeah. And, I've done it several times since that first one. And the last time, I spent the last 2 hours of it curled up on the bathroom floor in intense physical anguish for some reason. Um, it's always different, and you never know what to expect. So that brings us to the end of episode 2. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If any of you do have any interest in leaving us feedback, stories, ideas for future episodes, you can now email us at esotericwellnesspodcast@gmail.com. Go ahead and leave us any messages you feel you would want to there. Might even read them on the show.
And feel free to say,
yeah.
don't say my name, because we'd like to share experiences, but we don't have to.
Yeah, if you don't want us to read it on the show, say so, or I might. If you have any interest in working with me, you can find me on my website, www.kylebonbrake.com. It's KYLEBONBRAKE. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. And I do work with people both online, virtually, and in person if you happen to be in our local area. So thanks again for listening. If you made it through 2 episodes, we love you. Thank you for that. And I hope you stick around for the next one.
Like the kids say, like and subscribe.
Absolutely.
Tell your friends.
And we'll see you soon. Thanks
Bye.
for listening.